Why the Florida Wildlife Corridor couldn't save Split Oak Forest. You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. The Florida Wildlife Corridor's vision for conservation land in Florida stopped short of providing mechanisms to make it a reality. That was seen this week as the Central Florida Expressway Authority approved a toll-through part of protected Split Oak Forest in Osceola County.
Split Oak is going to be used as the case study for what happens when toll roads meet protected conservation land in Florida in the future.
Central Florida Public Media's Molly Durig takes a deep dive into what the Florida Wildlife Corridor does and doesn't mean for our region. That's ahead on The Wrap, the big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these headlines. Governor Ron DeSantis signed a $1.5 billion tax relief package into law Tuesday. The package creates two 14-day disaster preparedness tax holidays, a month-long summer sales tax holiday, a 14-day school tax holiday, and a 7-day tool tax holiday. DeSantis says the legislation also provides several tax credits for companies who employ individuals with disabilities, donate to child welfare charities, or provide child care for their employees.
It's expensive, and there's not enough options for a lot of parents who are working. So now you can have an employer get a tax credit if they're providing child care on the site, or if they're doing a program where they're helping their employees get the child care that they need.
The legislation also extends toll relief through March 2025 and will waive all taxes on insurance premiums for the next year for homeowners and flood insurance policies. Two NASA astronauts remain on the ground after a launch attempt Monday night of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft was scrubbed. United Launch Alliance, the commercial company tasked with launching the spacecraft, is replacing an oxygen relief valve on part of the Atlas V rocket. Ground crews raised concern over the valve, which was making an unusual chattering on the rocket. With 2 hours left in the countdown, controllers scrubbed the launch out of an abundance of caution. The next launch attempt will come no earlier than Friday, May 17th. The mission is the first time Boeing Starliner spacecraft will carry humans, designed to take astronauts to and from the International Space Station. The vehicle's development has been long delayed since an uncrewed test flight in 2019 failed to reach the station. Osceola County is planning artwork that will pay tribute to the 49 people slain in the Pulse nightclub massacre nearly 8 years ago. Central Florida Public Media's Joe Burns has the details.
Commission Chairwoman Cheryl Grebe says the county will unveil a design by celebrated public artist Jeff Frey on June 12th. It was on that date in 2016 that the mass shooting occurred inside the LGBTQ+ nightclub in Orlando. Grebe says she considered placing it in Neo City, but in the end got commission approval for Brownie Wise Park.
It's, to me, a much more tranquil setting. It's not going to be as commercialized. And, that's what the moms and the family members and such they're wanting. They're wanting somewhere to go and just for themselves to pay tribute to those individuals.
Grebe says it's not going to be a memorial. Orlando is planning a permanent memorial at the actual site, but she says many victims and their families had Osceola connections. Joe Burns, Central Florida Public Media.
These stories and more on our website. Visit cfpublic.org.
Support for The Wrap comes from our listeners. Make your contribution now at cfpublic.org to support trustworthy, independent journalism, including The Wrap. Community support is the foundation of this station and makes everything you hear possible. Support podcasts like The Wrap. Give online at cfpublic.org. And thanks.
Florida is home to a lot of wildlife, from the Everglades to the St. Johns River. 3 years ago, in an effort to protect the state's ecological diversity, lawmakers passed the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act, laying out a vision to connect more than 18 million acres of land for conservation. In partnership with the Florida Trident, the Oviedo Community News, and WGCU, this week, Central Florida Public Media's environment reporter Molly Durig explores how the Florida Wildlife Corridor doesn't actually stop land from being developed.
Development is booming in Greater Orlando. More people are moving here than almost anywhere else in the country. But nestled within all of that is Split Oak Forest, where I'm standing right now. It's quiet here. All I hear are birds, trees rustling in the wind, and the occasional plane flying overhead. It's a March afternoon when Valerie Anderson with Florida Native Plant Society is showing me some of her favorite parts of split oak forest.
Do you see the blueberries? The little blueberry flowers? Look right here. This is a shiny blueberry. It's Florida's smallest blueberry, and it's in flower right now.
When we think of wildlife, we tend to think of animals. That's how it's defined in Florida law. Animal movement is the main focus of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is supposed to preserve and connect natural areas serving as wildlife habitats. Those connections are important so animals, like the Florida black bear, can move around safely, avoiding highways and development. But the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act lawmakers passed in 2021 doesn't enforce anything, just encourages agencies that acquire land to invest in so-called opportunity areas, the 8 million acres of corridor land that aren't protected from development. Anderson says the wildlife corridor isn't just about protecting animals.
It's really easy for the public to focus on save the panthers, save the bears.
But what does it take to actually protect those animals long term? Biodiversity, the key to a healthy habitat. That means flood protection, clean water, things humans need too.
From a biodiversity perspective, it's much broader than just panthers and bears. It's also about ecosystem services.
That's Tom Hochter, who built the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, a massive database of Florida's natural resources, which Florida's land protection programs use to prioritize what's most important to save. But Florida Ecological Greenways Network, Hochter says, it isn't the catchiest name.
If we developed a campaign with a different name and turned it into a public relations and outreach campaign, that might provide more notice.
That's why the Florida Wildlife Corridor was born. Hochter says it's a PR campaign. It leaves out nearly a quarter of Florida's most important ecological lands identified by the Greenways Network. That means those lands aren't in the wildlife corridor. Lands that are still aren't necessarily protected, and labeling land as part of the wildlife corridor doesn't keep it safe from future development. Already, development is happening all around Split Oak. Soon, it'll be happening within the boundaries of this protected area, once CFX, the Central Florida Expressway Authority, starts building a toll road through part of the forest. State regulators approved the major development project despite Split Oak's layers of existing conservation protections and its location within the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Large, natural landscapes like this being divided into smaller plots, sold and developed, it's exactly the kind of habitat fragmentation the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act was supposed to prevent.
Thank you.
Outside the Orange County Administration Building one February morning, months before the state approves the road, about a dozen people are rallying to save Split Oak.
It's years later. We're still fighting, and now it's about more than preserving a forest. It's about demanding that they protect our constitutional rights.
That's Kelly Semrad with Save Orange County. She's talking about back in 2020 when 86% of Orange County voters approved a referendum to ratify Split Oak's protected status in the county charter. Back then, Split Oak already had protections from 6 different agencies in Florida, including through legal agreements established to protect Split Oak in perpetuity, meaning forever. But still, discussions were heating up about CFX's toll road idea, and Orange County environmentalists wanted more protection for Split Oak. So they got a referendum on the ballot, which passed by a landslide. Yet, just days ago, the toll road became official when commissioners with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, approved removing protections from Split Oak Forest.
I think it does meet the threshold of what our duty is of protecting fish and wildlife for the future, because we're getting additional lands.
For Valerie Anderson and members of her group, Friends of Split Oak Forest, in perpetuity feels like a broken promise. Anderson was at that rally back in February.
This is a fight between what is in the public's best interests versus what is in CFX's and the developers' best interests.
You set a precedent that threatens other conservation land.
That's Paul Owens, Executive Director of 1,000 Friends of Florida, a nonprofit pushing for more sustainable growth planning. He says Florida legislators have been unraveling development oversight since at least 2011 under former Governor Rick Scott. Owens says the goal was to avoid over-regulating Florida's growth and streamline development that could help boost the state's post-recession economy. But in reality, those changes then made Florida more vulnerable to development today.
If we degrade our environment, we are going to erode the foundation of our economy.
An economy that depends on people enjoying the outdoors.
We have a certain quality of life because of our environment, not in spite of our environment.
Back in Split Oak Forest, Anderson's showing me a map of where developers offered Orange and Osceola counties 1,550 acres of nearby land in exchange for giving up 60 acres of Split Oak. But Anderson says that swap land, as she calls it, isn't worth the trade.
It's not that the swampland has no ecological value or no value as conservation land. It's that the value is not worth exchanging for the ability to protect all conservation land in the future.
Anderson says that's what Split Oak represents.
Split Oak is going to be used as the case study for what happens when toll roads meet protected conservation land in Florida in the future.
Supporters of the toll roads say it's needed to accommodate Central Florida's booming population. That kind of growth is why Governor Ron DeSantis signed the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act in 2021. Recently, he described the corridor this way.
This is really significant swaths of Florida that are going to be used for wildlife protection and outdoor recreation for generations to come.
But Anderson has doubts.
It's not terrible to get these things protected as long as everyone recognizes that they're not really that protected.
She says while the idea behind the Florida Wildlife Corridor is great, to make it a reality, state and local governments must be held accountable to its vision of preserving Florida's natural resources from development.
And we need to come together as a society and as a culture to look at that and say, no, that needs to be protected.
Molly Durig, Central Florida Public Media.
Molly's reporting is part of a statewide reporting collaboration led by the Florida Center for Government Accountability. Tune in next week for part 2 of our special 2-part series. That's it for The Wrap. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with assistance from News Director Latoya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.